Let me tell you something. At my age, you think you've seen it all. You think nothing can surprise you anymore. But life has a funny way of humbling you, reminding you there's always one more lesson to learn, one more story to tell. And this story, this particular encounter, is one that still makes me shake my head and smile to this day. It happened about 3 years ago. I was flying from Los Angeles to New York for a business meeting. Now, I've been in this industry long enough to know that aviation is more than just getting from point A to point B. It's about service, dignity, and respect. That's why years ago, when I invested heavily in a regional airline and eventually became majority owner, I made it my mission to ensure that every single passenger was treated like they mattered. But here's the thing about success, both in business and in life. You learn pretty quickly that you don't need to announce who you are. You don't need a spotlight or a name tag for people to see your worth. A man's character should speak louder than his title. That's something I've believed all my life. So I've made it a point to travel modestly. No entourage, no special treatment. Just me, my boarding pass, and my carry-on like everybody else. That morning, I dressed simple jeans, a button-down shirt, a light jacket, and my old leather boots. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed movie star or owner. Just comfortable clothes for a cross-country flight. I had a first-class ticket seat, too, a window seat. I was looking forward to a quiet flight where I could review some documents, maybe close my eyes for a bit. I arrived early at LAX. My grandmother and my folks back in Mississippi drilled punctuality into me, and that lesson stuck for life. I got through security without a hitch, grabbed a coffee, and headed to the gate. When boarding began, I made my way down the jetway, and the moment I stepped onto the plane, I noticed him. You know how sometimes you can just feel a person's energy before they even speak? He was standing in the aisle near the front. Even from behind, you could tell this man thought very highly of himself. Expensive Italian suit tailored to perfection. Polished shoes that probably cost more than some people's rent. A wristwatch that caught the light with every subtle flick of his hand. The kind of watch meant to say, I've arrived. But it wasn't the clothes that caught me, it was the attitude. The way he stood, the way he gestured at the flight attendant, impatient, dismissive, the way he seemed to occupy more space than he needed, physically and spiritually. You could practically see the aura of self-importance radiating off him. As I walked down the aisle, nodding politely to the crew, I reached row 2 and stopped. There he was, sitting in my seat. Seat 2A, the window seat I'd carefully chosen weeks ago. He had his laptop open, briefcase beside him, typing away like the world depended on it, completely oblivious or maybe indifferent to the fact that he was in someone else's seat. Now, I'm not one for confrontation, never have been. On screen, folks might imagine I solve problems with a single line and a steady gaze. But in real life, I believe in calm and respect. So I cleared my throat gently and said, "Excuse me, sir. I think you're in my seat." He didn't even look up, just kept typing like I didn't exist. I waited, gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he didn't hear me. Planes are noisy during boarding, so I tried again, a little louder this time. "Excuse me, this is seat 2, that's my assigned seat." This time, He looked up, and the look he gave me, I'll never forget it. It was the kind of look that measures you in half a second and decides you're not worth acknowledging. His eyes scanned my face, my simple clothes, then back up again, and I could see it. That flicker of judgment, that cold calculation that said, this man doesn't matter. The seat's taken, he said flatly, then went right back to typing. No apology, no explanation, just 3 words, delivered with the kind of dismissal that said the matter was settled. Something stirred in me, not anger exactly. I've learned to tame that over the years. But something deeper, a kind of weary disappointment in how people treat one another. Here was a grown man, educated, successful, polished, and yet completely void of basic courtesy. I'm sorry, I said evenly, but I selected this seat when I booked my ticket. I have 2A printed on my boarding pass. Perhaps there's been a mix-up with your assignment. He sighed a long, exaggerated sigh meant to communicate just how inconvenient I was being. He snapped his laptop shut and finally turned toward me. Look, old man, those 2 words, old man. He said them with such condescension, such smug superiority, I almost laughed. I'm not moving. I've got important work to do. I need this window seat for my presentation, and I don't have time for this. There are plenty of other seats on this plane. Why don't you move to the back? The back. He actually told me to move to the back, like I was some second-class passenger who should just be grateful to be there. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, I remember, had been watching the exchange. She walked over, keeping her professional smile, though I could see the tension in her eyes. Sir, she said to him, may I see your boarding pass? We need to make sure everyone's seated correctly before we close the door. He waved her off. I'm in first class. That's all that matters. This seat is fine. I understand, sir, she replied gently, but this gentleman has seat 2A on his boarding pass. If you could please show me yours, we can get it sorted. I said, I'm not moving, he snapped, his voice rising just enough for the cabin to take notice. I'm a Platinum Elite member. Do you know how much money I spend on flights every year? Do you have any idea who I am? And there it was, that question of entitlement that I've heard too many times in my life. Do you know who I am? As if that should matter. As if that gives you the right to take what you want. Sarah stayed calm, credit to her. Sir, I'm sure we can resolve this quickly if you'll just show me your boarding pass. He reached into his jacket pocket, yanked it out, and practically tossed it at her. She glanced down, then looked back up, her voice steady. Sir, your assigned seat is 5C, the middle seat in row 5. This gentleman is correct. He has seat 2A. His face went red. That's impossible. I specifically booked the window seat. I'm not sitting in a middle seat like some economy passenger. Fix it. I'm sorry for the confusion, Sarah said calmly. But according to our system, you're in 5C. All other window seats are taken. If you'd like, I can check for upgrades or a later flight. A later flight? He shouted. He stood up abruptly, and for a second, I thought he might actually get physical. Do you have any idea what I have riding on this trip? I've got a meeting with investors in New York that could make or break a $50 million deal. I need this seat, and some old man who probably got his ticket on discount isn't going to ruin this for me. The cabin went silent. Everyone in first class had stopped moving. You could feel the tension, and I could have ended it right there. I could have pulled out my ID, explained who I was, but something inside me said, wait. Maybe it was pride, maybe curiosity. I wanted to see if this man had any decency left, any humility under that mountain of ego. So I said quietly, sir, I understand you're under pressure. Business can be stressful, but this is my assigned seat. All I'm asking is that you move to yours. He laughed this short, sharp sound with no warmth in it. You know what your problem is, old timer? You're from a different generation. You don't understand how the world works anymore. It's about efficiency, results. People like me make things happen. People like me drive the economy. And people like you. He looked me up and down again. You're just in the way. I've been insulted before. You don't survive decades in Hollywood or business without developing a thick skin. But there was something about this particular moment that hit deeper. Not because it offended me personally, but because of what it represented. This idea that some people matter more than others, that wealth or position gives you permission to treat people as less, to act like dignity has a price tag. And standing there, watching this man unravel, I realized something I had learned long ago, a truth that still humbles me to this day. Success doesn't define you. Character does. The captain had been informed of the delay and came out of the cockpit. He was a veteran pilot, someone I'd actually met a few times over the years, though he gave no sign of recognizing me in my casual clothes. Gentlemen, he said firmly, we need to resolve this now. We're delaying the flight. Then he turned to the man in the suit. Sir, you need to move to your assigned seat, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave the aircraft. You're going to throw me off? The man shot back, his voice dripping with disbelief and outrage. Do you know how many flights I take with this airline? Do you know that I could make one phone call and have your job? I know people high up in this company, very high up. The captain didn't flinch. Sir, FAA regulations require all passengers to be seated in their assigned seats. This isn't negotiable. You have two choices: sit in 5C or leave the aircraft. You have 60 seconds to decide. For a long moment, he just stood there, clearly weighing his options, probably calculating whether he could afford to miss this flight. Finally, with a look of pure venom, he grabbed his briefcase and laptop and shoved past me, deliberately bumping my shoulder as he went. This isn't over, he muttered. You just made a very big mistake, old man. He threw himself into seat 5C with such force that the passengers beside him actually leaned away. He sat there radiating fury, jaw clenched, knuckles white on the armrests. I settled into my seat, my correctly assigned seat, and pulled out my phone to send a quick message before takeoff. Sarah came by, quietly apologizing for the incident. Please don't worry about it, I told her with a smile. You handled that beautifully calm and professional. That's exactly the kind of service I like to see. She seemed relieved, thanked me, and went on with her duties. The flight took off smoothly. I tried to focus on my paperwork, but I kept glancing back at row 5. He was hunched over his laptop, still fuming, occasionally making calls when devices were allowed. I could hear fragments: incompetent staff, unacceptable treatment, formal complaint. Someone, he said, would pay for this. About an hour into the flight, after the meal service, I decided it was time. I pressed the call button, and when Sarah came over, I quietly asked if I could speak with the head flight attendant and the captain when convenient. A few minutes later, I was invited to the small area near the cockpit. The head attendant, Michael, and Captain Rodriguez were waiting. "Is everything all right, sir?" Michael asked politely. He glanced down at his tablet to verify my ticket, and I saw his eyes widen slightly as he recognized the name. Then he looked up, really looked at me, and the recognition hit. Oh my God, Mr. Freeman, I'm so sorry I know." I raised a hand. "Please, no apologies necessary. You couldn't have known. Honestly, that's exactly how I prefer it." I smiled, but I wanted to ask about the passenger in 5C. "Has he made any formal complaints yet?" Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. "He's demanded to speak with me twice. He wants to file complaints against Sarah, against you, against the airline. He's threatening lawsuits, says he'll make sure everyone involved loses their jobs." I nodded slowly. "What's his name?" Michael checked his tablet. "Marcus Thornton, Platinum Elite member. Flies with us frequently." "Marcus Thornton," I repeated. "And he really does fly regularly?" "Yes, sir. About twice a month, usually first class between LA and New York or Chicago." I thought about it for a moment. Here was a man who spent a lot of money with the airline I owned, someone who should have been the kind of customer we valued, but who treated people with contempt. He represented everything I'd spent my life fighting against: the idea that money buys you the right to be cruel. "Here's what I'd like to do," I told them. "When we land, arrange for Mr. Thornton to be met by airport services. Tell him his complaint has been taken very seriously and that senior management would like to meet with him immediately to address it. Bring him to the executive lounge at JFK." They both nodded, curious but professional. "And one more thing, make sure Sarah knows she did nothing wrong. In fact, I want her commended for her professionalism under pressure. Make a note in her file." "Yes, sir. Absolutely," Michael said. When we landed at JFK, I was among the first off the plane. I made my way to the executive lounge, a space I'd personally had redesigned the previous year to feel warm, comfortable, and human. I asked the staff to prepare the small conference room and to bring Mr. Thornton there once he arrived. Then I waited. About 20 minutes later, I heard voices outside. The door opened and Marcus Thornton strode in, still in that expensive suit, still carrying that air of entitlement, but now a satisfied smirk on his face. He thought he was about to watch people lose their jobs. He thought his version of justice was about to be served. He stopped cold when he saw me sitting alone at the conference table. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "I'm supposed to be meeting with senior management." I gestured to the chair across from me. Please have a seat, Mr. Thornton. I'm not sitting down with you. I'm here to file a complaint about you and others. Where's the manager? I stood slowly, walked to the credenza, and poured 2 glasses of water. Then I brought one back and placed it in front of the empty chair. Mr. Thornton, I said evenly, my name is Morgan Freeman. You might know me from movies, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I own this airline, majority shareholder. I'm as senior as management gets. I've seen a lot of expressions in my career. I've seen actors portray shock, disbelief, fear, and humiliation, but nothing I'd ever witnessed on screen compared to the look on his face in that moment. The color drained from his cheeks, his mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. You? You're? Yes, I said quietly. And before you say anything else, I want you to listen, really listen, because what I'm about to tell you is more important than your deal, your flight, or your platinum status. I sat back down and waited. He moved like a man in a daze, slowly lowering himself into the chair across from me. You called me an old man today twice. You told me to move to the back of the plane. You treated me like I was invisible, like my time and dignity meant nothing compared to yours. And you know what? If it had just been about me, I probably would have let it go. I've been insulted before. I'll be insulted again. At my age, that stuff rolls off easy. I took a sip of water and continued, but it wasn't just about me. You treated Sarah, who was just doing her job, with contempt. You dismissed Captain Rodriguez, a man with 30 years of experience. You made everyone in that cabin uncomfortable with your arrogance. And you did it because you believed your money, your title, your so-called importance gave you that right. He started to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. You said people like you drive the economy, create jobs, make deals, and maybe that's true. Maybe you are good at what you do, but none of that gives you permission to treat another human being like they're beneath you. I leaned forward. Do you know why I travel the way I do? Why I don't bring assistance or people clearing the way for me? Because the moment you start believing you're more important than everyone else, the moment you think the rules don't apply to you, that's the moment you stop being a decent human being. That's the moment you lose something essential, something sacred. The silence in that room was heavy. Marcus Thornton sat there, his $1,000 suit suddenly looking like a costume. His confidence had drained away completely. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I don't know what to say. That's a start, I told him. Not knowing what to say is better than saying the wrong thing with complete confidence. I paused, then continued. Now, let me tell you what's going to happen. First, Sarah will receive a commendation and a bonus for how she handled the situation. Captain Rodriguez will get a letter of appreciation for his leadership. And every staff member who witnessed what happened will know that their dignity and professionalism are valued and protected by this airline. He nodded slowly, waiting for the verdict. As for you, Mr. Thornton, I have a decision to make. I could ban you from flying with us. I could revoke your platinum status. I could make sure every partner airline knows how you behave today. And believe me, a part of me wants to, but I'm not going to do that. Do you know why? I looked him in the eye because I believe people can change. Sometimes we need to be shown our worst selves before we can become better. Today, you were shown your worst self. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? I pulled out a card and slid it across the table to him. This is the contact information for our customer relations department. Not to file a complaint, you don't get to do that, but to issue apologies. I want you to write personal apologies to Sarah, to Captain Rodriguez, and to every staff member who was affected by your behavior today. Real apologies, not the corporate kind that lawyers write. Apologies that show you understand what you did wrong. I stood up and walked to the door, then turned back to him one last time. You know what I've learned in my years on this earth, Mr. Thornton? The measure of a person isn't their bank account or their title or how important their deals are. It's how they treat people when they have no obligation to treat them well. It's how they act when they think no one important is watching. You failed that test today, but you get another chance. Most people don't get the kind of wake-up call you just got. Don't waste it. I opened the door and left him sitting there alone in that conference room. The rest of my trip to New York was uneventful. I had my meeting, handled my business, and flew back a few days later. I made a point of checking in with our customer relations department the following week. Marcus Thornton had sent letters, real ones, apparently quite heartfelt, according to the staff who received them. He acknowledged his behavior, apologized without making excuses, and even included personal details that showed he'd actually considered what each person experienced. 6 months later, when his platinum status was reinstated, he sent me a letter directly. I still have it somewhere. In it, he explained that day on the plane had been a turning point for him. He'd been so focused on success, so driven by competition and ambition, that he'd lost sight of basic humanity. He started therapy. He reconnected with his family, people he'd been neglecting, and he made changes in how he ran his business, treating his employees with more respect and dignity. I don't know if that change lasted. I hope it did. I like to think that sometimes when we're confronted with our worst behavior, we find the courage to become better. Here's what I took away from that experience. Respect isn't something you earn through money, status, or achievements. It's something every human being deserves simply by virtue of being human. The older gentleman sitting in economy, the young flight attendant serving drinks, the pilot flying the plane, the businessman in the expensive suit. We all deserve to be treated with basic dignity and respect. And for those of you who've achieved success, who have money, power, and influence, remember that those things are privileges, not rights. They don't make you better than anyone else. They make you more responsible for how you treat others. Because at the end of the day, when the titles, the money, the accomplishments are stripped away, all we really have is how we treated other people. That's the legacy that matters. That's what people remember. So the next time you're on a plane or in a store or anywhere else where you're tempted to use your status as a weapon, Remember, you never know who you're talking to. That old man might own the airline, but more importantly, he's a human being who deserves respect. And that's your cue.